Okay, we could get started. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. My name is Abdullah Akran, and I'll be your MC for tonight, inshallah. I would like to begin by welcoming you all to our Mass Members meeting. This is a Mass New York Tarbiyah program created to provide a platform for our members to receive Mass updates, announcements, spiritual reminders, and more importantly, to have open discussions, which is really important, especially during this time in the pandemic. So for tonight's program, we will begin with the Quran recitation by Brother Muhammad Zin. Next is our Mass New York announcement segment. And lastly, we will have our main section with Ustada Lobna Mulla. Now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Brother Muhammad Zin to start us off with some words from the Holy Quran, inshallah.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الذين قالوا ربنا الله ثم استقاموا تتنزل عليهم الملائكة ألا تخافوا ولا تحزنوا وأبشروا بالجنة التي كنتم توعدون نحن أولياؤكم في الحياة الدنيا وفي الآخرة ولكم فيها ما تدعون نزلا من غفور رحيم ومن أحسن قولا ممن دعا إلى الله وعمل صالحا وقال إنني من المسلمين صدق الله العظيم.
Jazakallah khairan, Brother Muhammad Zin, for those beautiful ayat from the Holy Quran. Next, on to our segment of announcements for Mass New York. And we are so excited for everyone here tonight to be the first to hear the news of the Mass Annual Youth Conference on March 27th, inshallah. So mark your calendars. It will be a big pre-Ramadan virtual event with renowned speakers, interactive discussions, and a spiritual revival to get us ready for the holy month of Ramadan. The holy month of Ramadan this year is going to be like a year unlike any other. There's so much going on. A global pandemic hopefully is coming to an end, inshallah. And there's so much that we can benefit from having this mass annual youth conference on March 27th. So once again, mark your calendars and stay tuned and make sure you follow us on Mass New York's Instagram and Facebook for more details to come, including the flyers and all the amazing speakers that will be there. And now finally, to the most important part of tonight and the reason why we're all here, Ustada Lobna Mulla, and just a quick introduction for Ustada Lobna Mulla. She was born and raised in Los Angeles, California. She has a degree in business administration and worked as an accountant for 10 years until she moved to Egypt with her family, where she spent several years studying Arabic, Quranic recitation, and Islamic sciences under Azhari scholars. She then pursued a Master's of Fine Arts in Screenwriting and is now a motivational speaker and community educator. She's the former National Tarbiyah Director of Mass and now an IOK Muslim chaplain at UCLA and the creator of the YouTube channel Double Shot Mocha Productions, where she strives to promote social awareness through humor. Ustada Lobna currently resides in Los Angeles, California, with her husband and 4 children. And so without further ado, and the reason why we're all here tonight, including myself, Ustada Lobna Mulla.
Jazakumullah khairan. Jazakumullah khairan, Brother Abdullah, for that introduction. It's really my pleasure to be here tonight. It's my honor, alhamdulillah, to join you on the opposite spectrum of the United States, alhamdulillah, the opposite coast. So may Allah bless you for all of your struggles, and it's nice to be here, alhamdulillah. So bismillah wa salatu wa salam ala rasulullah. I wanted to speak with you tonight about how we can overcome burnout and how can we avoid it, and you know, how to recognize some of the signs, inshallah. So I hope that this can be something beneficial for all of us, and definitely would love to get input from all of you, and of course leave some time for question and answer, inshallah. I'm just going to open up my notes here. Give me just 1 second. There we are. There we go. Okay, alhamdulillah. Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So, what is burnout? It is, as defined by a lot of organizational and volunteering websites. They talk about burnout as being a state of chronic stress, right? A state of chronic stress. But we're going to say all of us have stress. But then what is burnout? It's basically chronic stress that leads to a volunteer wanting to stop the work. But before that happens, there's exhaustion, there's cynicism. It's kind of like you're feeling, what is the point of all of this work? Or you feel like it's not really, you feel like the work that you're doing, it's A, either not beneficial, or B, you're not feeling good doing it. That's problematic. You feel detached sometimes from the mission. Sometimes there's feelings of ineffectiveness, as I mentioned, or lack of accomplishment. All of those feelings, subhanAllah, when you let them go for a long time, they're not dealt with. You're not doing steps to relieve yourself of this chronic stress, of this exhaustion, and all these other things. What ends up happening is that people just want to take a break, but not a short break. They just want to drop it altogether. And subhanAllah, this concept of burning out that happens in the workforce, it happens in all types of volunteer organizations. So it's not something that is unique to mass in any way, but as Islamic workers, that is something we definitely want to be aware of. We want to be aware of burnout. So inshallah, we can talk about the effects, because when we understand, inshallah, I want to back up a little bit. When we talk about burnout tonight, I want us to approach it from two different perspectives. One, how can we understand it as individuals? How do we deal with it as individuals? What are some things that we can do for self-care, spiritual care, so that we can prevent getting into burnout? But we also want to talk about all of these aspects of burnout from an organizational perspective. And inshallah, when we talk about it from both angles, the individual and the organizational perspectives, then we can talk about this in a healthy fashion. If we only address ways that people can deal with it individually, but we don't address the organizational kind of strategies, then we'd be missing the full picture. And alhamdulillah, I do feel like we have the ability to address both, inshallah. So what happens when volunteers burn out? Let me just answer a quick message. There we go. What happens when volunteers burn out? It affects the volunteers themselves, and that maybe leaves a bad taste in their mouth, where now they take a break, and if that break is forever, they never go back to that organization. So that's a problem. The people that are being served by the volunteer. So let's say, for example, the volunteer is a halakha leader, or a youth group leader, or a Sunday school leader, right? For example, imagine now that person feels burnt out. They're starting to feel bitter about the work. Nobody appreciates what I'm doing. I'm doing so much and nobody even recognizes it, or I'm not getting the help, or I'm overburdened. All of those things, right? Imagine now you're coming in, you're not giving the positive energy. That bitterness, that being upset, it shows off, and it's showing up in the way that you present yourself. And then the people that you're serving, they pick up on that, right? And maybe they don't want to start coming to youth group or come to the halakha or whatever it is, even if it's all virtual, right? That presence that we bring can be felt, whether it's positive or negative. So imagine if someone's feeling burnout, that anger, that bitterness, that exhaustion may come through and affect the volunteers that we're trying to serve. And we don't want to push people away either, right? And they're like, oh, well, I used to go to this one program, but this person was always upset or whatever, and so I don't want to come back anymore. It can also affect the peer volunteers. Imagine again that you're bringing in a certain energy, and it's affecting the other volunteers, because either they see that you're tired, they're like, well, I don't want this thing to happen to me, or maybe you're complaining, and because you feel like those complaints aren't being heard, that may be taken or viewed as being negative. And so again, it's just kind of affecting the volunteer environment. And of course, ultimately, it affects the organization itself. Volunteers, mass members in any of the public work that we do, whether it's kind of more internal or whether it's external, it is representative of the organization, so it can harm the image of the organization. And of course, as an infrastructure, volunteers are crucial and critical to the infrastructure of any organization, especially nonprofit, and especially, our beloved mass organization is a tarbiyah-based organization. So we're trying to develop people. You lose some of the cogs in the whole, the gears, or the whole, I should say, network, then, the infrastructure starts to fall apart as well. Especially if people just suddenly say, I'm out, I can't do this anymore. So definitely burnout affects the volunteers themselves, the people being served by the volunteers, peer volunteers, those that work with them, and then of course the organization itself. So this is all to say that it's very important that we really take account of this from an organizational perspective and from a personal perspective as well. So what leads to burnout? So definitely, we'll go back, from organizational perspective, organizational issues like what? Problems with management. Sometimes there's difficult personalities to deal with, or maybe there is a lack of understanding lack of definition of roles. If I think I'm supposed to be doing something and somebody else thinks that, or this task, I believe it's somebody else's responsibility, and that somebody else thinks it's my responsibility, when the ball gets dropped, what's going to happen? They're going to blame me, I'm going to blame you, and it just goes that way. Even if there's no blaming, things don't get done. So basically a lack of understanding of roles, problems with personalities, people that are overbearing. Maybe there's an inefficient system. Maybe a system hasn't been planned out. Maybe there's feelings of favoritism, where some people get more of the fun work or the more glorified work, or maybe more responsible work, and somebody else feels like the work is not being split in a fair way. Somebody can get, so that's one thing, all under organizational issues. Too big of a workload. Somebody may feel like they're overburdened, and what happens, you always feel like you're catching up, but you can never catch up, because in reality, what was assigned to you was too big to begin with. And maybe because of your excitement also, you didn't think it was going to be too much, or sometimes it just grows as time goes on. Having too much of a workload can also lead to burnout. Feeling unheard. If you've tried to express that this is too much for you, or you've tried to express that things can be done in a better way, or you're trying to express to, the team or to somebody who's above you, that there's some problems going on, they really need to be addressed. Maybe there's some, really difficult situations going on. So feeling unheard can lead to burnout as well. If you feel like your voice is not taken seriously. Feeling underutilized, and we're going to go, talk about each one of these. Feeling underutilized, if you feel like, man, I'm really good at, graphic design, I could be making the flyers, or I could help. And at the same time, you hear, oh, we didn't advertise because such and such, so-and-so didn't do the flyer yet. You hear that time and time again, and this happens. I'm just giving a very small example, or a very specific example. Other people feel like, well, why didn't they ask me? And this is a situation where, we'll talk about this, but if you feel like you have skills, we talked about that in the past, there's a difference between bragging or asserting yourself, or asking for power. You're not asking for power, but you're volunteering your skills and saying, look, I have these skills, I can help in this way. That's not like that's not really forcing yourself upon the organization, it's offering the help. So feeling underutilized constantly can also just kind of lead to this disdain, cynicism, which would lead people to have burnout as well. And finally, something very important, this is kind of the tarbawi aspect to, why that leads to burnout, spiritual aspect. It's kind of losing sight of why you were doing this work to begin with, right? And that's something that we can talk about. And that's definitely on an individual level, something that we'll talk about that. We'll leave that one for last. So when it comes to organizational issues, this is something for us to look at. If you hear a complaint one time, two times, that there's something going on, or there's somebody who's overbearing, maybe they are the administrator of the masjid, or of a particular program, and they're very short with people, they're very condescending. If somebody higher up notices that time and time again people are leaving under this individual, this would be a key thing for us to be aware of, that maybe somebody needs to talk to this individual. What's going on? Why does it seem to be a lot of turnover with volunteers? And it would, be really important to take this matter seriously, inshallah. Again, is there always like a last minute request, kind of pointing to inefficiency in sharing the work? You know that there's an event coming up. Is it advertised late? Are people just scrambling at the end and you ask for volunteers are being asked late? When you have those type of like emergency situations, but you're always operating on an emergency situations, people get tired. Because yes, one time, two times, three times, you can, just sacrifice and, wake up super early and help prepare for this event. I know we're not in person as much. My mind is going towards in-person events, but whatever it is, kind of putting in all this effort at the last minute. But if volunteers are asked to do this, or plan something last minute, and now they're having to set aside their family time, work time, school time, all of this, because of course, for the love of mass, for the love of wanting to do things for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they feel this good pressure. That's fine. But if it's time and time again, this will definitely lead to burnout. So this would point to not only overload on the volunteers, but this would also point to an inefficiency, doing things at the last minute from an organizational perspective. So something we need to think about. And this goes, this kind of relates to planning. The more that, the tarbiyah department or the youth department plans ahead of time, if they are able to put a big kind of, what are the big events for the year? That means what speakers do we want for the year? Generally, if these events are planned year in advance, as a general idea, we know we want to have this many qiyams, we know we want to have this many, one conference in the year or what have you, then people can start being assigned those responsibilities, and a list of what needs to be done can be understood well in advance. So anyway, planning, it prevents those inefficiencies that we were just talking about, which can really help in preventing burnout by putting a big load. And then being very, from organizational perspective, if you're very transparent in what opportunities arise, you're transparent in just on a lot of the sensitive, not sensitive meaning it's personal and private, that the organization should keep private, but things that kind of remove doubts, things that bring, people feel like, oh, I know what's going on in the organization. When there's transparency, volunteers feel like they understand what's going on to a reasonable perspective. That really helps in preventing, just having a sense of trust as well. When we talk about having too big of a workload, that's another thing that we talk about. So we talk about organizational issues, we talk about having a workload. This is where, again, management, whoever's responsible for a project, whoever's responsible for maybe the usar in this one region or what have you, if they understand, and they check in on their volunteers, that's very helpful, because then by understanding the load, it won't come as a surprise that somebody's overloaded. You check in with them. How are you doing? Is there any way that we could help? And we know that volunteers, and sometimes very skilled or very dedicated volunteers, are hard to come by. We understand it's not just always a matter of like, get more people to help. But at least, people who are in a position of kind of overseeing a project or overseeing a group of people, if they check in frequently, they kind of understand what's going on. Again, just having these conversations can help prevent burnout. Train other people. It does happen to be that oftentimes, you have that one person that's a superstar in this one area. You can't have one superstar. You need to maybe have a superstar and some junior people under them. There will always be like a certain age, or you just catch the person at the right time. When you get younger people or people who are not experienced yet, they love to help. They love to feel like they're doing something important, not in a patronizing way. But, like imagine if you are in, you're in charge of a youth conference, or if you're in charge even of the tarbiyah department, subhanAllah, get somebody junior to you, have them join you in meetings, have them get a feel for what it takes. And, they can start understanding how things work. It takes extra work to train other people, but that's tarbiyah in and of itself. And that's very smart planning for the future. Workplaces do it, and nonprofit organizations do it as well. Training. Not only in roles, but also if the organization has ability to train people, like in some leadership classes or some organizational, like actual time management, I should say, those are very helpful too, because you're also training people on how to be efficient, and especially within the local system as well. So training. Um, Oftentimes there are people who would love to help. There sometimes is not really an avenue by which they can let it be known that they want to help, if that makes sense. So, sometimes what it is like, okay, we have our mass members. Maybe we'll put out a blast saying there's something coming up, or maybe we do it through the usar. That's how we assign things. Sometimes what ends up happening, it's the people that are kind of well known and have always led this certain project. They'll get asked again because we can rely on them. And it makes sense. We can rely on them. They have the experience. But what ends up happening is you rely on the same people over and over again. And there's others that would love to help. But again, it takes a little bit of time to bring them in, to explain things. So if you give responsibilities for people who are hungry, you're not begging people, they're actually wanting to help. How can you find out who those people are is number one. And then how can you help facilitate having them help you? Another great way of kind of relieving a big workload is having a buddy volunteer. If two people are leading a youth group, it's very nice to be on the same page. And that way it's like, okay, I'm going to do 1 week, you do 1 week, or I'm mainly going to be the person there, but once in a while I'm going to call upon you. And, if you could take my place, I want to either spend time with my family, or there's something coming up for work or school. So having a buddy volunteer that's with you on a project, so that you can relieve each other, whether it's on a very structured basis or kind of here and there, that's also really helpful. That can be very helpful, inshallah. Okay. I was mentioning also one of the things that leads to kind of like this mental exhaustion and kind of cynicism and anger is when volunteers feel like they're unheard. So what does that mean from an organizational perspective? There should be different regular ways of communication. So through email, through WhatsApp. Inshallah, when we meet again in person, if there's an in-person space, I know, mashallah, in New York, you guys have some awesome masajid, mashallah. I've been there. It's very praiseworthy, and we're envious. The halal envy, we're really, it's beautiful, the community that you guys have. So whether it's in person or all the different online ways, but having a regular form of communication, having an easy means by which people can reach out and share a concern or an idea or a suggestion, that's super important. And of course, having that kind of, as we always say, open door policy. But if people feel that the ones above them or the ones that they can report to are very, kind of either condescending, or they make fun of you when you give an idea, or they just blow it off, people are not going to want to share their, what they're feeling. So, or maybe it's a frustration, or, something that went wrong. So there should be a regular modes of communication, and there should be opportunities where volunteers can freely, share opinions, feedback, suggestions, complaints. For example, like a debrief meeting, and I'm sure many of you do this already, but having a regular debrief meeting after an event, or after or even maybe after even some time, like in the tarbiyah department or something. How are things going in the youth group? Having once in a while where it's kind of like an open mic session where people can talk freely, it's so healthy. Even if management cannot implement all the ideas, but people feel like they're heard, and it's not, again, in a patronizing way, but they feel like they are part of the organization and they are important. Going into more detail, we talked about feeling underutilized. This also leads to burnout. So it's on the individual. Again, you can sell yourself, not by it's not a means of bragging. It's not that you want some type of glorious position, but you're saying, hey, I'm really good with youth. I'm really good in graphic design. I'm really good in kind of setting up a database or organizing events, whatever it is. You can let that be known. That's not bragging. That's actually offering your skills. You're letting people know, and then they can put it in their mind. Like, next time something comes up, we can ask so-and-so. That's actually really helpful. There are organizations where they list all of their volunteers and all of their areas of expertise. And that way, when they need a project or they need help, they can go to those people. So that's hopefully something, kind of like a volunteer management type of system. Kind of like a customer service, but for volunteers, it would actually be really helpful. So that can be something that the volunteers do themselves, but as an organization, you would want to know what are the skills of your volunteers and making sure you have a means of sharing those opportunities. I think too many times we do things in such a way where it's the same people over and over and again. That's how they get tired. But it's again because we trust them, they know how to do it. When you open up the circle, you take a little bit of a risk, but it's worth it. You will train new people. They get the tarbiyah as part of whatever they're doing. But that's how you also share the load. It's also very helpful, if there's like if there's a youth group or there's a circle of friends, or maybe it's a classroom from school or whatever it is. If you get them as a whole group to do some type of a project, that's helpful to the organization. That's also tempting, when you need help. Sometimes you don't have volunteers on hand, but you have, like, whenever you have a group and they're together, they know they're going to be together, even if it's virtually. That can also be helpful in how to kind of quickly get volunteers for something that maybe does not need a high level of training beforehand. And also, yes, nonprofit organizations don't always have a lot of money, but sometimes there is room, and maybe it makes sense to consider hiring a part-time associate who can offload, in particular, administrative duties. We see in some masajid, some youth groups, sometimes what happens, it's letting people know that there's an event, advertising for the event, or getting the volunteers or ordering things. Those things sometimes they fall off, they that ball gets dropped, so to speak. And if there's some central person that can help with a lot of these administrative things, or maybe it's calling usra leaders, or whatever it is, whatever communication or organization needs to be done, if one person can offload for many people, and that money is there, that might be really helpful. And sometimes those can be internships. Maybe it doesn't get paid a lot, but there would be a student who would love to have that experience on their resume. They would love to do it, and maybe it's for a shorter period of time, like 6 months. But that's how it can be a win-win situation for the organization itself, for the volunteers, and for the new person who's going to be helping out. Again, we always want to be thinking out of the box. Another thing that leads to burnout is, really losing sight of why we started to begin with. What does that mean? So now we can, really talk from an Islamic perspective. We say we're doing things for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. With that understanding comes a lot of, I don't want to say baggage in a negative way, but there comes a lot with that. What does that mean? It means I'm not going to look for recognition, right? And we'll talk about that. There are nuances. There's definitely a difference between, we want to encourage. I will talk about that now. We'll talk about one. So recognition. It can be a little heavy sometimes, especially if you're new, or if you're younger, or you've been around for a long time and you feel underappreciated. It doesn't mean you want your name on every single event and you want, a congratulatory email sent out to the whole organization. That's not what you're looking for. But maybe the people that, behind the scenes that knows, who kind of organized or who helped out, recognition, encouragement, that can be helpful. It doesn't mean you're looking because you're trying to be arrogant or you're not really being sincere. There's a fine line. So definitely from an organizational perspective, I would say, encourage your volunteers, thank them, appreciate them. We can have that, but at least us as the volunteers, yes, there's going to be times when you're doing things that are not glamorous. There's going to be times when you have driven far or walked far, back in the days before COVID, right? And you planned something and very few people showed up, right? Would you say, would you be like, well, I'm not going to do this next time because not that many people came? Or is this an opportunity for you to decide, was there something else going on that day? That shouldn't prevent you from doing the work. It's just maybe, obviously, you want to analyze for efficiency, for future events, what could we do to increase attendance? Was this just a fluke? What have you? But you do it for the sake of Allah, whether there's one person, whether there's 100 people, whether you see the effect in this life, whether you don't, because the work is on us and the result is with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is a beautiful concept, temporary concept we have, that we learn a lot in Mass. This is not unique to Mass, but it is definitely one of our core principles. Like, we put in the efforts for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we may see the results, we may not see the results, but it's that intention, and that's what matters, right? So recognition, encouragement, that's definitely one aspect. you know, when we're talking about the mission, you know, what is the mission of mass? You know, we want people to understand Islam with clarity. We want to of course uplift people. You know, I'm not reading the mission verbatim, okay, but we understand what we're here to do, right? And one of the things I can really relate to, seeing it time and again, is you never know what that one halaqa, what that one sports event, that one Sunday school class that you're like, oh, I'm waking up early on Sunday to help these kids and they don't even care. You know, you're not going to get things from kids. You may even get yelled at by the parents. You know, it's not glamorous at all, subhanAllah, but the reward is tremendous. You know, having peers like, you know, that are just a few years older, or maybe even several years older, but you have that love for the kids, for the teens, whoever it is, right? When you're in any type of a mentorship position, you know, halakha, whatever it is, you never know how you touch people when you listen to that one time, when you ask them how they were doing, when you compliment them on their looks or their participation. Seriously, I'm not saying that in a weird way. You know, we don't want to do opposite gender weird stuff, but I'm just saying, you know, there's so many things, like a small, you know, encouragement, a smile, you know, anything that really uplifts a person. We don't know their home life. We don't know their situation. Sometimes you do, and that's why you do what you do, right? And you interact with them in a particular way, but sometimes you don't. And it could be like, you know, something bigger, and it's just like a whole bunch of people are coming to a conference online or in person. And that event that you planned, you might have planted something very special, the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you know, restoring their faith in Islam, because sometimes people get jaded by events that happen in their life or bad interactions that they've had with elders or mentors or whatever, people in leadership. But you are that person that restored their faith. So subhanAllah, you know, the I don't want to just say the reward, because the reward of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is huge. We don't see it though immediately. So you know, but the impact also, the impact that you have on people can be, you never know. And it's so many different people over so many years. So your impact is huge. And these are some of the things that when we talk about it, it reminds us of why we're doing what we're doing. We're doing it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, number one. We're helping people in such a tremendous way. Bringing them closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you know, helping them to understand how they fit in this world. You know, why do bad things happen? You know, you as a mentor, you know, as a leader of a program, or, you know, helping in something in the masjid, whatever it is that you volunteer in, you're impacting people, and you're impacting them in a very integral part of their life, which is their faith. So subhanAllah, this is extremely important. So being able to be behind the scenes and being okay with it, being able to not be acknowledged, even though that's a good practice, that's something different from organizational perspective. But, you know, nobody knew that you're the one that did all this work in terms of the public, right? These are the things that, you know, doing these good deeds, doing things that, you know, help people. SubhanAllah, even from a mental health perspective, it is proven that even if you're depressed, and I mean that even in a clinical way, you know, you're really suffering from anxiety or depression, one of the things that's talked about in the mental health field is actually help other people. It takes it distracts you. Yes, the pain that you're feeling is real, but by putting in your efforts into something other than yourself, it removes you from it, and you feel good about the results that you're doing. So, you know, these are some of the things, if we think about all these different aspects, it can help us in preventing this burnout, inshallah. So I definitely wanted to open it up now and talk about some of the particular ways that you're feeling burnout. Of course, it can be anonymous, or, you know, however you guys want to bring it up, inshallah. But I think it's important that that we also kind of get feedback from you in some of the specific areas, or do some Q&A as well, inshallah.
Jazakallah khairan, sister. I did see some that were sent to me directly. One
Great.
of them was saying that volunteers that are trying to volunteer and they're aiming for a specific area, specifically like in their organization, and they're hoping that as they continue volunteering and they're burning themselves out, that they're eventually going to get there. And they feel like that burnout is what's going to get them there. That if I don't burn myself out, I'm probably not going to get to that ideal place in the organization. So I have to do this. So just anything that you could give around that would be really helpful.
That is awesome. That's a great question. I appreciate this. I have a couple of thoughts, and then correct me, please, either privately or publicly, if I'm not really hitting the mark. So couple of different angles on this point, because I do, you know what, it's interesting, this question, why I appreciate it, because I feel like sometimes the level of showing, the intention is not to burn out, right? But that just go, doing a lot of work nonstop, any time of day, call me, I'll drop everything for you type of attitude. I almost feel like sometimes either we understand it as a volunteer or that's what's expected. And yes, I understand, subhanAllah, as mass, as our our previous activists and our scholars, there is selflessness, absolutely selflessness. But what happens if you're going to just keep going nonstop and you don't take care of yourself? Oh, we didn't even talk about self-care. I'll talk about that, when we finish our questions, inshallah. What happens when you bring yourself to the ground? Then you're useful to nobody. You can get sick mentally, physically. Some people really take away from their family. I believe me, I'm into family sacrifice, right? I understand that. And I always question, like, did I do it too much with my kids? You have to be balanced, right? There's times you can be super busy for a few weeks because something's going on, maybe even a couple of months, fine. But to do that nonstop, you're harming your body, you're harming yourself, you're harming your family. Again, short-term intensity, fine. But is that something we're asking people as an organization? When we talk about selflessness as one of the 10 characteristics of an Islamic worker, does that mean we're destroying ourselves and destroying our relationships? No. So I worry sometimes that either A, as this person asked, isn't this something kind of beneficial because it'll help you get to where you want to go? Or maybe B, people think this is what is meant by selflessness. Or C, that the organization really expects this and will think that you're not as good of a volunteer or a mass member or a naqib or naqiba or whatever the role is, or a chapter head or whatever, if you're not just always sacrificing for last minute things, time and time again. So I don't know if I'm gonna be very popular after tonight. So, but again, there has to be this balance. I know that some people unhealthily just throw themselves. That's their own personality, but maybe they're in a leadership position. And maybe it's their own personality. Yes, I love these comments. Maybe it's their own personality that they put kind of like all of their attention into the dawah. And sometimes, I'm telling you, from a mental health perspective, I'm not a professional therapist, but I'm married to one, and we've seen it, that it's an unhealthy response to some people, I'm not saying everybody, kind of avoiding conflict at home or avoiding trouble. So they'll put all their attention into the dawah. Beautiful, thing, even if the intention is pure, but subconsciously, but but now other people looking up to them, they're seeing that's what's supposed to be done. MashaAllah, look at this Ammu, look at this Khawtu, look at this Tant, look at this, auntie. They're doing so much, they're but we didn't know behind the scenes that, like, sometimes the kids are leaving Islam. They're taking drugs. I'm not kidding. Kids of leaders, they're taking escape because they felt the neglect at home. Again, difference between, excuse me, I'm going to be busy for this many weeks or months, to nonstop, you guys are last priority. So those three categories: feeling like you need to do it to get somewhere, B, feeling like that's what it truly means to be selfless, or C, that the organization expects that, or some leadership expects that. All of those, to me, from my experience that I would like to share from my perspective, that's not healthy. But again, you really showed selflessness when it came to finishing a project, finishing a conference, an event. Somebody got sick last minute, maybe because they were overdoing it. No, somebody got sick or dropped out last minute, and you really came through and you really shown, yeah, that's fantastic. I worry though, if we say, you need to do burnout to get somewhere. Why do we want to get that place? Why do we want to get somewhere in a leadership position? I'm not saying we shouldn't strive for that, but we would just want to make sure, always ask, is this for the sake of Allah? Leadership is a heavy burden. you will be asked more by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala if you fulfilled your duties, right? Are you ready for that duty? The responsibility of leadership, of checking in on people, of taking the load. So we always want to make sure that we understand the load of leadership, or like a kind of like something that's more in the, in the up, something that's more visible in terms of a role in the organization. Do we understand the heaviness of it? And then the second one is, are we really doing this for the sake of Allah? Are we saying, hey, I really want to show myself because I know I can turn things around and do things differently, or do things in a helpful way? Just, we always want to just be aware. I'm not saying that this drive is bad. Somebody says they can emphasize with this. I worked 4 jobs. Wow. I got sick, lost 30 pounds. So that's intense. That's intense. So yeah, and this can happen. Yeah, self-sabotage, absolutely. It turns into self-sabotage, and again, for the love of Allah, for the love of the organization, because the people are depending on you, because you're very dependable. It's understandable why people fall into this. So thank you, Sister Saira, for really mentioning this. It's helpful so that we get perspective.
I have 2 more questions, and these I feel like are coming from more of an organizational standpoint,
Great.
where it's saying that the community sometimes feels, or if an organization feels like their community is burnt out, and all their volunteers have been constantly overworked, and now they just can't show up to the events, especially in communities where there's a low number of volunteers, where it's the same 6 or 7 people that keep showing up to every event, and they're the ones that have been really carrying the load. How or what can these organizations do to really revamp their volunteers, bring them back into the playing game without burning them out once again?
Yeah, absolutely. Jazakumullah khairan for this question, because this is I feel like when we reach this point, and it definitely happens when we reach this point, I feel like this is where we really want to strategize. What happened that made people get burnt out? Did we have an overarching, sorry that I like to look at all angles, so it may seem like blaming, but did we have somebody who was overarching and pushing people too much? I've overheard quite a few people being yelled at, like just different organizations, different parts of the country, even within mass, people being yelled at sometimes. It really, I was like, wow, that's condescending, man. Like, to myself, I'm not going to share that with other people. So what's going on? Why are people burning out? Are we planning ahead enough? Are we training enough? Yes, it takes a little bit. Maybe there'll be a tight time of like a couple months, but that double time of like somebody training somebody else or planning, those things will help prevent the burnout. And to begin with, because why would you want to invite people back saying, no, we have a really good system, but you didn't plan, so it's just going to happen again. Then you'll lose them forever. And maybe even more people, they'll tell their friends, no, forget about it, man. Don't even help out here. They're not organized. So plan ahead of time, train people, have an open line of communication, and tell them, look, guys, we really, we have this opportunity for you. Let them understand that they can put this project on their resume. Whether they're going, something that they want to put for, in high school and they're applying to college, and it can be structured in such a way. So sometimes it does take a little bit more work on leadership's part, but that investment in making sure that things are planned, making sure there's training, making sure that people are checking in on their volunteers. Don't wait until they drop dead and then say, what happened? It's a little bit late, but alhamdulillah, we can regroup. But I feel like this is where there needs to be some strategy. Inshallah, I hope that was helpful.
Yeah, definitely. Before I ask the last question, I just want to make sure if there's anyone else that has any questions, they want to speak up, unmute.
I have a sister. She sent a question. She wants to know how to get involved with Mass. She's located in Brooklyn. She wants to know how she can get involved with the center. We do have Brother Tahir. He is the Brooklyn Staten Island chairman. So I don't know if he would like to answer that question. Brother Tahir, how can we get involved in Mass Brooklyn?
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullah. So we actually have a volunteers coordinator, and her role is to connect with people like you that want to get involved with the work, inshallah. So I'll share her contact information in the chat, and you can contact her. She'll be able to link you with the different departments interested in getting involved. But that's great to hear that you do want to get involved, inshallah. I'm going to put it right now.
Jazakallah khairan. Another another amazing thing that Mass has, volunteer coordinators, something that is really needed to keep volunteers grounded and motivated to keep going, knowing that they know that there's someone that they can go to that isn't really considered to be part of leadership, but it's still someone that is almost like them, that they could connect to, come to them with their issues. And I feel like that's something that's really important for youth. And so the last question that I have that someone sent over was, how can organizations and even youth create a normal culture where they're able to say no after feeling burnt out, without them being looked upon as lazy, or them being looked upon as he doesn't want anything to do with organization, rather than them just being tired. They need to say no sometimes.
Absolutely. I feel like, wallahi, that's a fantastic question. I feel like we need a seminar on like how to say no. The reason why I'm laughing is because this is a skill. It's a skill amongst peers. How do you tell somebody you don't want to do what they're doing? Like, you just don't want to do it and you don't care what they think, right? Like, how do we build that confidence? But also, how do you say no in a nice way when it's something good? Like, it's fantastic to help the masjid. It's fantastic to be involved in a planning of an event, or a youth coordinator, or usra, whatever it is, right? But you have to be realistic. Are you a grad student working 4 jobs? You say no. Okay. So how do you say no? You understand that you respect your body. How are you going to function, physically, mentally, if you're not giving due rights? We have this hadith, and I'm going to badly paraphrase, but right, if somebody said that they wanted to pray all the time and they wanted to fast all the time, and Prophet Muhammad SAW said, that he prays sometimes and he sleeps sometimes, and that he fasts sometimes and he eats sometimes. So, our deen is one of balance. There's selflessness when it comes to, we're not looking for recognition. We're going to put in extra effort. That's fine. But there's something going on with your health. Your family needs you. There's some extenuating circumstance, or, you just really feel overloaded, overburdened. You can say, I would love to help with X, Y, and Z. And sometimes, unfortunately, there's methodologies, we'll call that passive aggressive. So I'm like, oh, like you said, right? Someone's passive aggressive with you. And for somebody who's not used to saying no, just a few of those comments is enough to make you go back on your word and be like, okay, fine. Like, oh, come on, you're the only one who can do it. Come on, what happened to you? You used to always say yes. Those kind of passive aggressive comments, or just kind of, putting on the guilt, that makes you say yes. But then in the end, you did not do your self-service, and you did not do justice to the project that you were supposed to help. So I think in being able to say no, it's understanding that your body has a right upon you, and that your family in extenuating circumstances absolutely has a right upon you. If you have somebody who's sick at home and you're the main person to be home, you cannot be going out all the time. Yeah, alhamdulillah, you can do something for half an hour, you're able to do it, great. But there's something you're just very aware, no, I can't. With great confidence, you say, I would love to, but I would not be able to do it at this time. As long as it's coming from sincerely, since it's coming through sincerely, and you mean that with ikhlas. That's nice, alhamdulillah. How do you say no? Yes, lack of sleep, eating quickly, just eating junk because you don't have time to do stuff, not even going to the bathroom. I know people who, like, this happens to them. They'll get like a bladder infection. Sorry to be so like descriptive, but I'm telling you, there are things that we do that we just say, okay, sacrifice. And this is not what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from us. This is not what we mean by being selfless. Your body has a right upon you, and so do your other responsibilities. If you're married, or if you have kids, alhamdulillah, there can be times that you talk about it with your family. It's realistic for you. Yes, and absolutely you do it. That leads me, so that's how you say no. Be confident in what you're doing is the right thing. When you know you're going to fail by saying yes to 3 things, what was the point of saying yes? Just to make, in the end, you're just worried about saving face, if you think about it, right? So I hope I answered that question. I want to say something about self-care, because that was one category that I forgot to mention, and then we'll go into this message that I got. Self-care. So yeah, before you burn out, when you start to feel like, man, I'm starting to get really angry, I'm getting really tired, I'm like dropping the ball on a lot of things, take a break. I'm not saying quit and say, oh, I'm not going to lead halaqah this semester. I'm not saying that. But maybe you ask somebody, can I get a couple of guest speakers and take my place, right? So you take some time to refresh yourself. Make sure in general that, again, you're getting enough sleep. You take time to eat between your really busy schedule. And I'm not saying you're super busy because of volunteering, but sometimes you're so busy and then add on volunteering that now you've neglected some of your self-care. Make sure you take like quick breaks, go outside. I know when it comes to, of course, a conference or convention, we're just like nonstop, people like don't eat, and okay, fine, that's super temporary. But even then, can we implement 5 minutes of like some self-care? Make sure that we pray. How many times have we, astaghfirullah, we've come close to missing salah, or we've missed salah because we're doing something, right? So make sure we're praying, make sure we're eating, we're taking a break during an event, but definitely as part of everyday life, making sure that we're eating properly. And, if we feel mentally frustrated or overburdened, that we talk to somebody that we trust that can actually help. These are ways that we want to make sure when we say take self-care, that, exercising a little bit, even if it's for 5 days, making sure you're reading Quran, doing the dhikr. These are things that calm the heart, relax you, so that you just don't build up all of this stress and then just really, it just becomes very toxic. Somebody's asking, what are some ways to deal with having ideas of things you want to do in Dawah, but not knowing where to start? This creates a cycle of new ideas popping up, but no way of how to do them or follow up on them. And that sometimes lead to not doing anything at all. And I think that's kind of part of what I was mentioning about being underutilized sometimes, or feeling like you're not heard. If you do have these ideas, you mention it, someone's like, oh, that's great, but not now, or we don't have time for that. What ends up happening is, it leads to not doing anything at all, or losing motivation because you feel like you end up not doing much or anything at all. And that's a great idea. I will say this. I don't have a great answer for everything that you said, but I will say this. What I've seen, in the past, sometimes leaders, when we're so busy, we're saying, no, to be like, can I do this? No, because you're thinking, oh, it's not going to be executed well. If you have somebody that you trust, but it's never been done before, they're excited about it, they're willing to take the responsibility, ask them to put a proposal. Don't say, so this person, that you're asking, what about when you have ideas in Dawah, you want to do it through mass, why not put together a proposal? I believe, so 2 things. From an organizational perspective, we want to hear people's ideas. We want to take it seriously. We don't want to be so busy in leadership that you don't have time for people, right? That's how you turn volunteers away. And from the volunteers' perspective, if you put together a proposal, this is how it'll be done, this is how much it'll cost, I'll need this many people, this is how often it'll happen, 1, 2, 3, 4. A proposal is a great way to organize your ideas, but then also able to sell it to leadership and say, hey, are you guys willing to let me try this? And a lot of times what ends up happening when it's well thought out, leadership might be hesitant, but they'll be grateful that in the end you did this and it was so successful. Or, it was a great start, and now they're going to have suggestions on how to go forward. So I hope that helps, is, put it together, put it in a proposal format, don't lose hope. And inshallah, with your good intention, eventually you will get, you'll be able to implement what it is that you want to do, inshallah. We definitely don't want to lose motivation. Barakallah fiki.
Just checking in, see if anyone else has any questions before we wrap up, inshallah. Anyone that wants to unmute or put it in the chat. I see that Sister May has posted a form for anyone that's interested in volunteering in Mass Brooklyn, inshallah. And if there are no questions, inshallah, we're going to be wrapping up tonight. Jazakallah khairan, Ustada Lobna. We have a comment from Brother Tahir. Go ahead, brother.
So very quickly, first of all, Jazakallah khair, Sister Lobna, amazing information. I'm glad I attended. I actually learned a lot tonight. Just one thing that came to my mind was when it was mentioned about how certain things could have happened in the past that turned off volunteers or people on committees. And I think, communication is very, very important, because sometimes it could just be a misunderstanding. It could have been somebody in leadership in that moment. They were like really stressed out, and they might have said a word that was, a little bit temperamental, and they didn't even think about it. 2 seconds later, they forgot about it. But to that volunteer, they were like, that guy just yelled at me.
Yes.
Or that executive director or that board member, and they'll think about it. It could be a huge turnoff. And the person, if he even knew, or she even knew how hurt they they hurt that volunteer, they would be happy to apologize. But again, communication is very important. So I think my advice to everybody, and something that you can share, keep that communication open. If there's some type of issue that occurred, bring it up, settle it, squash, and move forward. One of the worst reasons for somebody to leave Dawah is because of like one incident that occurred, and it is happened, and it's happened time and time again. So just, it's not good to hold things inside. Clear it up, communicate, and move forward. A lot of times it was just a misunderstanding that could have been settled, and hearts cleared, and back to working for the sake of Allah.
Great, Jazakallah khair. That's awesome. Barakallah feek.
I see that Sister Ma has raised her hand.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
Jazakallah khair, Sister Lobna. An amazing talk with a lot of beneficial points. I wanted to just make a comment of leadership in general. And I feel like we run with this this idea that like, if you don't want to do the work, someone better will come and do the work instead, right? So the train of mass will always keep going with or without you. And I feel like this concept, yes, it's true. If you don't want to do the work, someone better will come, but there has to be some sort of accountability on leadership, driving and throwing people off of this train, and then throwing that concept of they didn't want to be part of it, so we're moving without them. So I'm glad that you've mentioned so many points with like how to incorporate time management, making sure like, and I feel like there was like this quote on Twitter, it was like, before you unload your problems to a friend, ask them what kind of state they're in, so that way they're able to like, handle the load. And I feel like with our volunteers, like with leadership, we need to say, okay, what are you doing? And I feel like that's something that a lot of our leadership don't know. Like, what is Brother Abdullah doing? And let me figure that out before I throw another task on him, instead of throwing the task on him and then figuring out what kind of load he has when he disappears, or like, whatever the case is.
Yes.
So I do feel like communication is very important. I do feel like leadership needs to take more into account of like, not just burnouts, but people being pushed out, right? And then also that factor of like constantly checking in before you assign any volunteer a task to see if this is something they can handle, and not let them feel bad with say, always saying yes and afraid to say no, So Jazakallah khair so much.
MashaAllah, may Allah reward you. That's awesome. Do people actually say that somebody else will come along if you don't do this?
But I don't know if it's a hadith or whatever the case is, that Allah will replace you with better. Like
Sure.
if you leave Islam,
way, do people kind of use it like a little bit in a threatening kind of way? Like, okay, if you don't want to do it, Allah will give you somebody. Is that, do people use it in that way?
not in a threatening way, but in a sense of like to motivate the people that are left. Like, if they left, it's, Allah will replace people with better, it's up to us to be part of the movement, and whatever the case is, like, motivational way, not a threatening way.
Okay, good. Alhamdulillah, that's good. I was gonna say, if we're using it in that way, then, maybe we want to show, okay, alhamdulillah. Barakallah fiki for bringing that up. It's super important.
So just checking in one last time, Jazakallah khairan, Sister Maha, for those comments. Let me check in one last time. If anyone has any questions, comments, anything that you want to bring up right now, I'll give another second or two. You could put it in the chat. If not, we could wrap up tonight, inshallah. Jazakallah khairan, Ustada Lobna Mulla. And definitely there was so much that was brought here tonight, so much knowledge that we can all take home today, from volunteers to organizations. Everyone benefited in some way. So subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik, nashhadu an la ilaha illa ant, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. And finally, just a final reminder for everyone, the mass youth, the annual youth meeting that's coming up on March